So let's talk about voting and the voting rights of African Americans. African Americans have a long, hard fought battle when it comes to obtaining voting rights. Even after the 15th Amendment, yeah, we still had a long way to go because the governments in each state will put in place several practices that will prevent us from voting, and that still happens today. There was even something called the grandfather clause in the early 1900s that had to be struck down by the Supreme Court just to allow black people to vote. Why? Because that clause actually said unless your grandfather had voted, you can't vote. So you know what that means, right? African Americans weren't allowed to vote. That grandfather clause had to be struck down in 1915. Even after that, it was still very dangerous for us to line up and vote. They would actually try and take us out while in line. And when I say take us out, I don't mean take us out of the line. I mean take us out of this life. Yeah, many people died for going to vote. Now, many people have never seen this pamphlet that I'm about to show you. But here's the pamphlet, and it's called What a Colored Man Should Do to Vote. It was published in the 1900s, and it shows many of the barriers that African Americans faced in order to vote, particularly in the southern states. To the colored men of voting age in the southern states, as citizens of the United States, you cannot value too highly your right to vote, which is an expression of your choice of the officers who shall be placed in control of your nearest and dearest interest. You should vote at every election, in national and congressional elections. Vote for the best interest of the country. In local elections, vote for the best interest of the community in which you live. Never sell your vote. So basically, it's explaining why we should all vote. Who we vote for is an expression of our choice of the officers who shall be placed in control of our nearest and dearest interest. We should vote at every election for the president, the Congress, our local elections. Now, back in those days, for African Americans to vote, there were a whole bunch of rules, and the rules were different in each state. In order that you may know what will be demanded of you to vote under the constitutions and laws of the several southern states, we give below the substantial requirements of each, to wit. In Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee, you must pay your poll tax. You must register and hold your certificate of registration. If you can read and write, you can register. In Alabama, Louisiana, and South Carolina, if you cannot read and write, you can register if you own $300 worth of property. Now, to put in context, $300 back, let's say, in the year 1900 was about $10,000 to $11,000 today. In Arkansas and Georgia, you must pay your poll tax. In Florida, Kentucky, Texas, and West Virginia, you must reside in the state. A man convicted of almost any crime may be barred from voting. In Alabama, must reside in the state 2 years, 1 year in the county, and 3 months in the election precinct. Poll taxes for 1901 and each year since must then be paid before the 1st of February prior to the election. Persons over 45 of age are exempt from poll tax, must be registered and hold a certificate of registration. In order to register, must be able to read and write any article of the Constitution of the United States and must be regularly engaged in some work, employment, business, trade, or calling the greater part of the year before the election, unless physically unable to work. A person who cannot read or write must own, or his wife must own, 40 acres of land upon which he must live, or must own real and personal property assessed at $300, or his wife must own the same, upon which the taxes for the year before election must be paid. Any person convicted of a felony, adultery, larceny, wife beating, miscegenation, vagrancy, selling, or offering to sell his vote is forever barred from voting. So, as you can see, just coming up out of bondage, there were many people who may not have been able to actually read and write the articles of the Constitution of the United States of America, so they would have been barred. Also, not many of them own 40 acres. Not in the state of Alabama, so guess what? Can't vote. If we move on down to Louisiana, we can skip down to the second paragraph. It says must be registered, and in order to do so, must be able to read and write and demonstrate such ability to the registrars. Let's get down to Mississippi and let's go on to the 4th paragraph. Must be registered, and in order to do so, must be able to read any section of the Constitution of the state, or shall be able to understand the same when read, or give a reasonable interpretation thereof. Here we are with South Carolina. Must be registered in order to do so. Must be able to read and write any section of the Constitution submitted by the registrars. And if unable to read and write, must prove to the satisfaction of the registrars. Okay, the ownership of $300 worth of property in the state upon which all taxes for the previous year must have been paid. Any person convicted of felony, adultery, larceny, wife beating, or miscegenation is forever barred from voting. So those are some of the things. Here's the problem, right? You have the 15th Amendment again, that says you can't be denied by race or previous servitude. Well, the thing about it is that the previous servitude would hinder all of these things. Okay, the reading and the writing part, for example, many could not read and write because they were previously under servitude, and it was illegal to read and write for them. So that's out. And then the crime. Well, anything was a crime when you're African American. Anything. Just a simple accusation. Well, you can't vote. And of course, just coming out of bondage, everybody didn't have $300. Facts. And everybody did not own 40 whole acres. Even today, do you own 40 acres? Exactly. So imagine. And of course, with the poll tax, well, if you couldn't afford to pay the poll tax, you just couldn't vote. And a lot of people could not afford to pay the poll tax, which was done away with in 1964. All of this history to say that it's very important for African Americans to vote, because if it was not important for us to vote, no one would be trying to stop us. Now back to the beginning. Your vote is an expression of your choice of the officers who shall be placed in control of your nearest and dearest interest. You should vote at every election. Vote Democrat. Vote Democrat for President, Kamala Harris, and vote Democrat for the seats in Congress in November.